projects I work on are probably 1 megawatt to about 10 megawatts. A lot of data centers, a lot of bank facilities, operation centers down the line. And when you look at residential and you look at the million solar roofs, quite frankly, I think it's rather difficult for a residential owner to put up photovoltaics. I mean, my mom has been trying to do it for at least 5 years. I just bought a house and I'm trying to navigate through the whole rigmarole, and I actually know what I'm doing. So it's rather difficult. It's not as easy as, oh, all I have to do is just fill out a form and go to my bank with the magic form and I'll get a loan, and $12,000, $20,000 later I can put up photovoltaics. So I think there's obstacles. I think there is a lot of NIMBYism. There is a lot of that not in my backyard. I went to Department of Transportation with a little proposal to possibly use some of their land, and the very first thing out of their mouth was, you need community buy-in, you need to get your council members involved, you need to get the PACs and the CACs involved, and many of them will say those things are ugly and I just don't like it in my neighborhood. So it isn't just as cut and dry as there's a will, there's a way, because although from my experience it sounds good on paper, when the rubber hits the road, it just doesn't quite translate and doesn't quite provide any acceleration, if you will.
You had a thought, Anne?
Yeah, I would also say that there's one other piece, and you asked a very specific question about why you saw certain things in Europe and not here. I live in San Francisco. I live in dense multi-resident housing, basically, and we're always looking at the fact that we don't live in houses. And so when we see solar and we see electric vehicles, we want that, but we can't get it in a gigantic apartment building. And there's a collective choice problem there, but you actually are starting to see in Europe, and particularly in Germany, that apartment buildings are banding together for collective action to actually retrofit buildings for solar and things like that. So there's a different level of consciousness, I think, and a different level of buy-in when we're talking about those issues in other countries.
In fact, I'd like to follow up a little bit on this whole NIMBY issue as renewable energy projects become more mainstream. Are you seeing more NIMBY issues just like are associated with traditional projects? And Manal in particular, how's the state of California squaring that need for renewable energy generation with its environmental disclosure and its public participation requirements?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. You alluded to the Arcane Energy Commission process earlier. The California Energy Commission was established 30 years ago in part to stop the proliferation of nuclear plants. So there is a very cumbersome, to say it politely, public process. In fact, the California Energy Commissioner cannot even speak to their own staff about the specifics of a project unless it's in a public setting. So we have a very robust public process in California. The flip side of that, it takes a very, very long time to get something permitted. So I don't think we have the problem of not having enough public participation. When it comes to NIMBYism, I guess the short answer to the question is it's not really like traditional energy. It's a little bit different. When it comes to local individuals, if you go down to a local community where these solar projects, the large plants are being proposed, oftentimes at the Energy Commission hearings, you will see dozens of local community members lined up in support of projects, in large part because, as I mentioned earlier, they're in high unemployment areas and you have high-paying, stable jobs coming to the region. So typically the local communities in support, especially for dry-cooled projects or projects that aren't using a lot of water. When it comes to the counties, the actual county government, it's actually interesting because some counties have actually come out in opposition to large-scale solar. And it's a byproduct of a couple things. One, that the state has the permitting authority. Two, that solar doesn't actually pay property tax. So as a county looks at a solar project, they see a dwindling tax base, and they see 5,000 acres of their land being eaten up without any property taxes being generated. And in addition to the actual face of the project, California has very rigorous environmental laws. And if you're going to use 5,000 acres of sensitive desert habitat, you have to go out and find equivalent land somewhere else, oftentimes at a ratio of 3 to 1 or 5 to 1. So if I'm a solar developer and the county is looking at the project, they see 5,000 acres gone for the project, and they see another 15,000 acres taken out of their county that's going to be put into conservation easement, oftentimes in perpetuity. So So one thing that I think is different here is that you actually see county governments that have some of the NIMBYism concerns, in part because they don't feel or see the financial incentive. But I think the most interesting development when it comes to NIMBYism and large-scale solar is within the environmental community. Typically, for traditional energy sources, the environmental community is pretty unified in their opposition. And what we're seeing right now in solar is actually quite fascinating, where you have different environmental organizations and oftentimes different people within the same organization on different sides of the project. You have the climate change environmentalists who have been fighting for holistic policies to reduce carbon emissions for years, pitted up against land conservation, species protection environmentalists. And so one of the interesting things is, in watching, especially what's going to happen in the next few months, is where's the environmental community going to fall on large-scale solar projects? Especially because the state and federal government don't currently have a real mechanism to tell projects where to go. We kind of have to consider what's provided to us, and there are sensitive habitats with really high solar radiation. So I think that's the most unique aspect of NIMBYism when it comes to large-scale solar.
It sounds to me like there's maybe an opportunity for solar developers to get together with your folks at BLM, Michael, and maybe they can be directed to public lands because at least that takes care of the tax base issue. They're not on the tax base anyway.
Well, I think you've just set it up. We're going through a process, as Manuel just talked about, to really look at land and try to mitigate the issues or identify the potential issues, and then declare what we will call energy zones where a developer can be directed to. But let me step back a little. You know, in the 1980s, or let me start. Today what we're seeing with renewable energy is what we saw in the 1980s with oil and gas development. And in the 1980s, it was a lot of NIMBYism. We don't want oil and gas development, either for environmental issue, conservation issue, view shed issue. And so today, in renewable energy, a lot of it is in view shed issue. When I'm driving down the road, I don't want to see a wind turbine, nor do I want to see the mirrors that is glittering from the sun. And so we're having a lot of that. And so I think the issue is, how do we take this potential 150, 160 million acres of public land, clear a set of land, hopefully we can get everyone to agree to, so when an investor comes to invest, it cuts through the red tape, because today some people are spending $2, $3, $4, $5 million only at the end to be told you can develop. Well, and 4 years later, we want to change that. And so we're going through a process where hopefully by 2012, we would have identified about 12 or 13 million acres for solar. We're going through that same process where by 2013, we would have identified what we call renewable energy zones for wind. And on the public lands, the developer will know where to develop, and hopefully the environmentalists will not change their mind after they've agreed to that.
And just real quick, there's a companion state process to that that encompasses private and public land in the California desert that we're developing jointly with the BLM. So we're hoping also by 2012 to have master plan 24 million acres of the California desert. And at the end of the day, what you will get is a map with go here, don't go here. And developers can still choose to build where they want, but if they build in zones that have been pre-approved, the process will be significantly easier.
And building on your forestry background, we've talked a lot about wind and solar, but particularly in the northern parts of California, as well as the whole Western Climate Initiative region, there's a lot of national forest lands, etc. What is the role of biomass and forestry here in the Western United States in this whole debate?
It's a very controversial one. I was just on a CEC-sponsored biomass field tour up in the Tahoe Basin. A lot of controversy on how you deal with forest biomass and whether or not it's a renewable source. There are concerns that if you open up forest biomass, you're going to open up incentives to deforest. So I think there's a lot of skepticism. There's also a lot of pushback in forest advocacy communities against transmission lines being run through pristine forest lands for other types of